The Night Stalker's rampage. The summer of 1985 in Los Angeles was a season of dread, a time when the city's neon glow and sun-soaked streets masked a creeping terror that slithered through the night. The air was thick with the hum of air conditioners, the buzz of cicadas, and an unspoken fear that gripped neighborhoods from the sprawling suburbs to the urban heart of Southern California. Doors were locked, windows barred, and residents slept with one eye open, haunted by a phantom the press had dubbed the Night Stalker. His name was Richard Ramirez, a shadow of a man whose name would soon become synonymous with evil, a figure who seemed to embody the darkest impulses of a chaotic era. To understand the horror of his rampage, one must first peer into the twisted mind of the killer, the turbulent backdrop of 1980s Los Angeles, and the sinister motives that drove him to unleash a reign of terror that would scar the city forever. Ricardo Leyva Munoz Ramirez was born on February 29, 1960, in El Paso, Texas, the youngest of 5 children in a working-class Mexican-American family. From the outside, he might have seemed unremarkable, a lanky boy with dark eyes and a quiet demeanor. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. His childhood was a crucible of violence and trauma, forging a psyche that would later erupt into unimaginable cruelty. His father, Julian, a former policeman turned railroad worker, was a volatile presence, prone to fits of rage that left young Richard cowering. But it was his cousin Miguel, a Vietnam War veteran unhinged by schizophrenia and PTSD, who planted the seeds of darkness. At age 12, Richard watched, transfixed, as Miguel showed him Polaroids of Vietnamese women he claimed to have raped and murdered, their lifeless bodies posed like trophies. The images seared themselves into Richard's mind, a grotesque gallery of violence that fascinated and corrupted him. At 15, he stood frozen as Miguel shot his wife, Jessie, in the face during an argument, her blood splattering the walls of their home. This was no mere exposure to violence. It was a baptism into a world where brutality was not just possible but glorified. By the time Richard dropped out of high school in 9th grade, he was already spiraling. He smoked marijuana at 10, graduated to cocaine, and began burglarizing homes to feed his growing addiction. Los Angeles, with its sprawling chaos and underbelly of crime, beckoned him in his early 20s. The city was a paradox in the 1980s, a glittering hub of Hollywood glamour and excess, yet plagued by rising crime, gang violence, and a pervasive sense of unease. The Manson family murders of the late 1960s still lingered in the collective psyche, and the crack epidemic was beginning to tighten its grip. Against this backdrop, Ramirez found a perverse sense of belonging. He drifted through the city's seedy motels and transient neighborhoods, his long, greasy hair and rotting teeth marking him as an outsider, a ghost slipping through the cracks of society. What set Ramirez apart, what made him a specter of terror, was his obsession with Satanism. This was no casual flirtation with the occult, but a fervent, almost theatrical devotion to the Prince of Darkness. He saw himself as a disciple of evil, a warrior for Satan who believed his crimes were offerings to a malevolent force. He devoured books on the occult, listened to heavy metal anthems that glorified rebellion and destruction, and began to weave satanic imagery into his life. Pentagrams became his signature, scrawled in blood or lipstick at crime scenes, a chilling calling card that amplified the fear his attacks inspired. To Ramirez, Satan was not just a symbol but a guiding force, a stabilizing presence that justified his depravity. "Satan is a stabilizing force in my life," he later said, his voice cold and unrepentant. "It gives me a reason to be." This belief was not just a delusion, it was the engine of his violence, a twisted rationale that transformed random acts of cruelty into a perverse ritual. Los Angeles in the mid-1980s was a city ripe for such a predator. The sprawling metropolis, with its maze of freeways and isolated suburbs, offered endless opportunities for a killer who thrived on chaos. Homes were often left unsecured, windows ajar to catch the breeze in the sweltering summer nights, an open invitation for a man who moved like a wraith. The media, hungry for sensationalism, fueled the growing panic, plastering headlines about the walking killer or valley intruder across front pages. The lack of a clear pattern in Ramirez's attacks, victims of all ages, ethnicities, and neighborhoods, made him seem omnipresent, a boogeyman who could strike anywhere. The city's residents, already jittery from a decade of high-profile serial killings, began to arm themselves, with gun sales spiking as fear took root. Ramirez's motives were as complex as they were horrifying. His crimes were not driven by a single impulse, but by a toxic blend of rage, addiction, and a desire for control. His drug use, cocaine, LSD, and PCP, amplified his paranoia and lowered his inhibitions, turning his fantasies of power into reality. Burglary, his initial vice, was no longer enough. It was the act of violating the sanctity of a home, of dominating his victims, that fed his need. Sexual assault became a tool of humiliation, a way to degrade and terrorize. The satanic elements, while partly performative, gave him a sense of purpose, a way to elevate his crimes beyond mere violence into something cosmic, eternal. He didn't just want to kill. He wanted to be feared, to be remembered as a force of chaos in a city already teetering on the edge. The stage was set for a rampage that would plunge Los Angeles into a nightmare. Ramirez, with his gaunt frame and hollow eyes, was no longer just a drifter, but a predator honed by a lifetime of trauma and twisted beliefs. The city, vibrant yet vulnerable, was his hunting ground. As the summer of 1984 gave way to a blood-soaked 1985, the Night Stalker began his descent, leaving behind a trail of broken bodies and shattered lives. Each unlocked window, each darkened bedroom, was a canvas for his cruelty, and the people of Los Angeles would soon learn to fear the sound of their own homes settling in the night. The terror was only beginning, and the man who called himself the Night Stalker was ready to etch his name into the annals of horror. Los Angeles in the spring of 1984 was a city pulsing with life, its nights alive with the thrum of music, the glow of neon, and the restless energy of a metropolis that never slept. But beneath the surface glamour, a darkness was stirring, a malevolent force that slipped through the cracks of the city's sprawling suburbs and quiet neighborhoods. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, had begun his reign of terror, and what started as whispered rumors of a shadowy intruder would soon explode into a nightmare that held Southern California in a vice grip of fear. His home invasions, murders, and sexual assaults were not just crimes. They were performances of pure evil, each act more audacious, more depraved than the last. The city was his stage, and the horror he unleashed was a crescendo of violence that left entire communities trembling, yet morbidly captivated by the mystery of the man who struck in the dead of night. The first whispers of the Night Stalker came in June 1984, when the body of 79-year-old Jenny Vinkow was found in her Glassell Park apartment. The scene was a tableau of horror. Her throat slashed so deeply she was nearly decapitated. Her body sprawled across her bed. The room ransacked. The brutality was shocking, but it was the violation of her home, a place where she should have been safe. That sent chills through the neighborhood. Police found no clear motive, only a trail of blood and a pentagram scrawled on the wall, a cryptic signature that hinted at something far darker than the simple burglary gone wrong. The city didn't yet know it was the opening act of a gruesome saga, but the stage was set, and Ramirez was already prowling for his next victim. By early 1985, the Night Stalker's rampage had escalated into a fever pitch of violence that seemed to defy reason. His attacks were chaotic, unpredictable, striking across Los Angeles and beyond, from the sun-bleached hills of San Gabriel Valley to the quiet streets of Orange County. On March 17, 1985, in Rosemead, Maria Hernandez, 22, drove into her garage, unaware that a pair of dark eyes watched from the shadows. As she stepped out, Ramirez emerged, his .22 caliber pistol gleaming under the dim light. The shot rang out, a deafening crack, but fate intervened. Maria raised her hand, and the bullet ricocheted off her keys, sparing her life. She collapsed, playing dead, as Ramirez stepped over her body and entered the condo. Inside, her roommate, Dale Okazaki, 34, wasn't so lucky. A single bullet to the forehead ended her life as she ducked behind a counter, her body crumpling in a pool of blood. The scene was electric with terror, the air thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the eerie silence that followed. Maria's survival was a miracle, but her description of the lanky, dark-haired man with a chilling grin would haunt her dreams and fuel the city's growing panic. Just an hour later, in Monterey Park, Ramirez struck again, his hunger insatiable. Sally and Veronica, U30, was driving home when he forced her car to the curb. He shot her twice, her body slumping against the steering wheel as he fled into the night. The randomness of the attack, on a public street, in plain view, sent shockwaves through the city. Who was this phantom, this predator who seemed to materialize from nowhere, leaving death in his wake? The media seized the story, headline screaming of a walk-in killer who could strike anywhere, anytime. The lack of a pattern, young, old, male, female, rich, poor, made every resident a potential target, and the city's collective pulse quickened with dread and fascination. Ramirez's methods were as chilling as they were theatrical. He favored the night, slipping through unlocked windows or sliding glass doors, his movements silent and deliberate. His weapons were varied: guns, knives, hammers, even a tire iron, chosen as if to keep his victims guessing, to heighten the terror of the unknown. In Arcadia, on March 20th, 1985, he crept into the home of 64-year-old Vincent Zazera and his wife, Maxine, 44. The couple was asleep, their home a sanctuary, until Ramirez turned it into a slaughterhouse. Vincent was shot in the head, his life snuffed out before he could stir. Maxine awoke to a nightmare, bound and beaten as Ramirez ransacked the house. Her defiance enraged him. He stabbed her repeatedly, carving her body with a knife, even gouging out her eyes in a grotesque act of mutilation. The scene was a carnival of horror, the walls splattered with blood, a pentagram smeared in lipstick on the bedroom mirror. Detectives who arrived at the scene felt their stomachs churn, not just at the carnage, but at the realization that this was no ordinary killer. This was a monster who reveled in his work. The sexual assaults added a layer of depravity that made the Night Stalker's crimes even more horrifying. In Whittier, on May 14, 1985, Ramirez broke into the home of William and Lillian Doy. William, 66, was shot in the face as he reached for his bedside gun, his body crumpling as Lillian, 63, cowered in terror. Ramirez bound her, raped her, and beat her savagely, his laughter echoing through the house as he rifled through their belongings. Lillian survived, her body bruised and her spirit broken, but her description of the attacker, his gaunt face, his rancid breath, his taunting whispers of "Satan protects me," added fuel to the growing legend of the Night Stalker. Each assault was a violation not just of the body, but of the very idea of safety, a reminder that no lock, no prayer could keep him out. As spring turned to summer, the body count rose, and the city's fascination grew into an obsession. Ramirez's attacks were a macabre spectacle, each one more brazen than the last. In Sun Valley, he abducted a 6-year-old girl from her bedroom, assaulting her before abandoning her in a nearby field, her small body trembling as she stumbled home. In Northridge, he slit the throat of 83-year-old Mabel Bell and beat her roommate, 81-year-old Florence Lang, leaving them for dead with pentagrams drawn on their bodies. The elderly, the young, couples, singles, no one was safe. The randomness was part of the terror, a twisted game that kept Los Angeles on edge, every creak of a floorboard a potential death knell. The climax of Ramirez's rampage came in August 1985, as the city teetered on the brink of hysteria. On August 8th, in Diamond Bar, he invaded the home of Elias and Sakina Abawaf. Elias, 35, was shot in the head as he slept, his blood soaking the sheets. Sakina, 27, was bound and raped, her 2 young children spared but forced to witness their mother's torment. Ramirez's cruelty reached new heights as he taunted Sakina, demanding jewelry and cash, his voice a low growl laced with menace. "Swear to Satan," he hissed, forcing her to pledge allegiance to his dark deity. The scene was a fever dream of horror, the air heavy with the stench of blood and fear, yet Ramirez moved with a chilling calm, as if savoring every moment of his power. The tension in Los Angeles was palpable, a city held hostage by a killer who seemed untouchable. Gun stores sold out of shotguns, locksmiths worked overtime, and neighborhood watch groups patrolled with flashlights and baseball bats. Yet, amidst the fear, there was a perverse thrill, a collective fascination with the Night Stalker's audacity, his ability to strike and vanish like a ghost. Radio stations played heavy metal tracks like AC/DC's Night Prowler. Unaware that Ramirez drew inspiration from such songs, his warped mind seeing them as anthems to his crusade. The city was caught in a strange dance of terror and intrigue, every new attack adding to the mythos of a killer who seemed to defy the laws of man and nature. The resolution of this chapter of terror came not with a dramatic showdown, but with a slow, grim realization. The Night Stalker was human, fallible, and leaving clues. Survivors like Maria Hernandez and Lillian Doy provided descriptions that began to coalesce: a tall, thin man with dark hair, bad teeth, and a stench of decay. Footprints from obvious sneakers, a rare brand, were found at multiple crime scenes, linking the attacks. Ballistics matched bullets from a .22 caliber pistol across murders, tying the spree together. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, led by a task force under Sergeant Frank Salerno, began to piece together the puzzle, their exhaustion matched only by their determination. Ramirez's transient lifestyle, flitting between cheap motels and stolen cars, made him elusive, but the net was tightening. The city held its breath, equal parts terrified and enthralled, waiting for the moment when the Night Stalker's luck would run out. The stage was set for his downfall, but not before he left a trail of devastation that would haunt Los Angeles for decades. The summer of 1985 in Los Angeles was a pressure cooker of fear, the city's vibrant pulse now racing with paranoia as the Night Stalker's shadow loomed larger with every blood-soaked headline. Richard Ramirez, the phantom who turned homes into slaughterhouses, had transformed Southern California into a landscape of dread, where every unlocked window was an invitation to death. His crimes, brutal home invasions, savage murders, and depraved sexual assaults, had no pattern, no mercy, only a chilling consistency of terror. Yet, as the body count rose, so did the resolve of a beleaguered police force, galvanizing a task force to hunt a killer who seemed to dance just beyond their grasp. The pursuit of the Night Stalker was a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, charged with desperation, ingenuity, and a city's collective yearning for justice. Ramirez's transient lifestyle and cunning evasion kept him one step ahead, but the net was tightening, and the drama of the chase was as gripping as the horrors he unleashed. By July 1985, Los Angeles was a city under siege, its residents barricaded behind newly installed deadbolts, their nights haunted by the specter of a tall, gaunt figure with rotting teeth and a devil's grin. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, led by the tenacious Sergeant Frank Salerno, formed a task force that became the epicenter of the hunt. Salerno, a veteran detective who had chased monsters like the Hillside Stranglers, knew this killer was different, chaotic, unpredictable, and fueled by a darkness that seemed almost supernatural. The task force operated out of a cluttered office in East Los Angeles, walls plastered with crime scene photos, maps dotted with red pins marking attack sites, and sketches of a suspect based on survivor accounts. A lanky man with dark, stringy hair, a stench of decay, and eyes that burned with malevolent intent. The media frenzy amplified the stakes, dubbing the killer the Night Stalker, a name that sent shivers down spines and sold newspapers by the thousands. The pursuit was a race against time, each new crime seeing a fresh wound on the city's psyche. On July 20th, 1985, in Sun Valley, Ramirez escalated his savagery, creeping into the home of Max and Lella Needing, an elderly couple asleep in their bed. The air was thick with the heat of a California summer, their windows cracked open for relief, a fatal mistake. Ramirez shot Max, 68, in the head, the blast shattering the quiet of the night. Lella, 66, woke to a nightmare, her screams cut short by a machete that hacked through flesh and bone. The scene was a bloodbath, the walls sprayed with arterial red, a pentagram scrawled in lipstick on the bedroom door. Detectives arriving at the scene felt their stomachs lurch, not just at the carnage, but at the realization that the killer was taunting them, leaving his satanic signature as a dare. The task force worked around the clock, fueled by coffee and adrenaline, piecing together fragments of evidence, obvious sneaker prints, .22 caliber shell casings, and survivor descriptions that painted a portrait of a predator who moved like a ghost. Survivors were the key to the chase, their harrowing accounts, both a blessing and a curse. In Mission Viejo, on August 6, 1985, Chris and Virginia Peterson fought back against the Night Stalker, their defiance a spark of hope in the darkness. Chris, 38, awoke to a flashlight beam and a gun in his face. He lunged at Ramirez, who fired, the bullet grazing Virginia's head. The couple's struggle was a chaotic blur of shouts and gunfire, but they drove him off, his curses echoing as he fled into the night. Virginia's description of his gaunt face, his rancid breath, and his chilling whisper, "Swear to Satan," matched other accounts, giving the task force a clearer picture. Yet, each survivor's story added to the mythos, a twisted allure that captivated the public. Neighborhoods buzzed with gossip, half terrified, half thrilled, as people swapped theories about the killer's next move. Gun shops sold out of revolvers, and vigilante groups patrolled streets, their flashlights cutting through the dark like desperate beacons. Ramirez's evasion was a masterclass in elusiveness, his transient lifestyle a perfect shield. He lived like a vulture, scavenging the underbelly of Los Angeles, cheap motels and Skid Row, stolen cars, and abandoned buildings. He drifted between neighborhoods, from the affluent hills of Arcadia to the working-class streets of East Los Angeles, never staying long enough to be pinned down. His drug addiction, cocaine, PCP, and LSD, kept him wired, paranoid, and unpredictable, his movements erratic yet deliberate. He stole wallets, jewelry, and cars from his victims, using their cash to fuel his nomadic existence. One night he might sleep in a flea-bag motel on Hollywood Boulevard, the next in a stolen Toyota parked under a freeway overpass. His ability to blend into the city's chaos was infuriating, a taunt to the task force that pored over maps and tip lines, chasing shadows. The tension reached a fever pitch in August 1985, as the Night Stalker's attacks grew bolder, his cruelty more theatrical. On August 18th, in San Francisco, a shocking departure from his Los Angeles hunting grounds, Ramirez invaded the home of Peter and Barbara Pan, a retired couple in their 60s. Peter was shot dead in his sleep, his blood soaking the sheets. Barbara was raped, beaten, and left for dead, a pentagram drawn on her thigh in lipstick. The attack sent shockwaves through the Bay Area, proving the Night Stalker's reach extended beyond Southern California. The task force scrambled to coordinate with San Francisco police, the pressure mounting as the killer seemed to mock their efforts. A breakthrough came when a .25 caliber bullet from the Pan crime scene matched ballistics from Los Angeles, confirming the Night Stalker's spree had crossed county lines. The media went wild, headlines screaming of a satanic serial killer who could strike anywhere, anytime. The public was hooked, their fear laced with a morbid fascination, as if the Night Stalker were a dark celebrity starring in a real-life horror show. The task force's big break came from an unlikely source, a 13-year-old boy in Mission Viejo. On August 8, 1985, James Romero III spotted a suspicious orange Toyota prowling his neighborhood. Sensing danger, he memorized the license plate and alerted his parents, who called the police. The car, stolen during a previous attack, was found abandoned, dusted for prints, and yielded a crucial piece of evidence, a partial fingerprint on the rearview mirror. The task force's heart raced as the print was rushed to the FBI's new automated fingerprint identification system. Days later, a match came back, Richard Ramirez, a drifter with a rap sheet for theft and drug possession. The name sent a jolt through the task force, but there was no face to go with it until a grainy mugshot surfaced from a 1984 arrest. On August 30th, 1985, that mugshot was plastered across every television screen and newspaper in California, the headline screaming, "Night Stalker identified." The city erupted in a mix of relief and panic. Ramirez's face, gaunt, with hollow cheeks and eyes that seemed to stare through the soul, became an icon of terror. The task force braced for a manhunt, but Ramirez was a ghost, slipping through bus stations and back alleys, his satanic bravado masking a growing paranoia. He was unaware his identity had been exposed, still prowling, still planning. On August 24th, in Mission Viejo, he attacked Bill Carnes, 30, and his fiancée, Inez Erickson, 29, shooting Bill 3 times in the head and raping Inez, forcing her to swear on Satan before fleeing in another stolen car. Inez's vivid description of his black AC/DC cap and decaying teeth matched the mugshot, sealing his fate. The climax was near, but Ramirez's final act of evasion was a desperate sprint through a city now united against him. The resolution came not from a dramatic police raid, but from the collective fury of a community pushed to its breaking point. On August 31st, 1985, Ramirez stepped off a bus in East Los Angeles, oblivious to the fact that his face was everywhere. The task force had flooded the streets with his image, and residents, fed up with fear, were ready to act. As Ramirez walked through a Hispanic neighborhood, a group of locals recognized him, their shouts of "El Matador!" The killer igniting a chase. The drama was electric, a mob of angry citizens pursuing the Night Stalker through dusty streets, their shouts echoing like a war cry. Ramirez, panicked and cornered, tried to steal a car, only to be beaten back by residents wielding bats and pipes. The chase was a chaotic symphony of rage and retribution, the city reclaiming its power from the man who had terrorized it for months. Police arrived just in time to save Ramirez from the mob, cuffing him as he spat and cursed, his satanic bravado crumbling. The task force's relentless pursuit, fueled by survivor accounts, forensic breakthroughs, and a teenager's quick thinking, had cornered the uncatchable. The city exhaled, but the thrill of the chase lingered, an intoxicating mix of horror and triumph. The Night Stalker was no longer a phantom but a man, flesh and blood, his reign of terror halted by a community that refused to be afraid any longer. Yet, as Ramirez sat in a cell, his trial loomed, promising a new chapter of drama that would keep Los Angeles riveted, eager to see justice served to the devil who had haunted their nights. The summer of 1985 in Los Angeles had reached a boiling point, the city's streets electric with fear and fury as the Night Stalker's reign of terror pushed its residents to the edge. Richard Ramirez, the gaunt, satanic predator who had turned homes into slaughterhouses, was no longer a shadow slipping through the night. His face was everywhere, plastered on every television screen, newspaper, and lamppost in California. The task force, led by the relentless Sergeant Frank Salerno, had finally given a name to the nightmare, and the hunt for the Night Stalker was hurtling toward a dramatic climax. The city was a tinderbox, ready to ignite, and the capture of this elusive monster would be a spectacle as gripping as the horrors he inflicted. Yet, even as the net closed around him, the story of Ramirez was far from over, its final act a blend of chaos, confession, and a chilling open-ended mystery that would leave Los Angeles and the world hungry for more. The tension in East Los Angeles on August 31st, 1985, was palpable, the air thick with the heat of late summer and the buzz of a community on high alert. Ramirez, unaware that his mugshot had turned him into the most wanted man in California, stepped off a Greyhound bus in the heart of a working-class Hispanic neighborhood, his black AC/DC cap pulled low, his lanky frame draped in a stolen jacket. He moved with the cocky swagger of a man who believed he was untouchable, a disciple of Satan protected by dark forces. But the city had other plans. A local shopkeeper, squinting at the newspaper taped to his window, caught a glimpse of Ramirez passing by. His heart raced as recognition hit. "El Matador!" he shouted, the word slicing through the morning calm like a blade. Heads turned, eyes widened, and within moments a crowd gathered, their fear morphing into a primal, collective rage. The chase was on, and it was nothing short of electrifying. Ramirez bolted, his long legs carrying him through dusty alleys and over chain-link fences, his breath ragged as the mob swelled behind him. Men, women, even teenagers joined the pursuit, wielding baseball bats, tire irons, and sheer fury. The scene was a chaotic ballet of retribution, the shouts of "It's him! The Night Stalker!" echoing like a war cry. Ramirez, desperate and cornered, tried to carjack a Mustang, yanking at the door and snarling at the driver, a grandmother who swung her purse at him with defiant courage. Another attempt to steal a car ended with a pipe crashing against his shoulder, the crowd closing in like a pack of wolves. The drama peaked as Ramirez, bloodied and panting, stumbled into a backyard, only to be tackled by a group of residents who pinned him to the ground. His curses, laced with satanic bravado, were drowned out by the mob's roars, their fists and feet delivering a rough justice until police sirens wailed in the distance. Officers arrived just in time to save Ramirez from being torn apart, cuffing him as he spat and sneered, his dark eyes still burning with defiance. The arrest was a cathartic release for a city that had lived in terror for over a year. Crowds gathered at the scene, some cheering, others weeping, as the Night Stalker was shoved into a squad car. His reign of terror abruptly ended not by a SWAT team, but by the raw, unyielding spirit of a community pushed too far. The task force, exhausted but triumphant, watched as their months of tireless work, sifting through obvious sneaker prints, .22 caliber ballistics, and survivor accounts, culminated in this chaotic, almost cinematic moment. Yet, as Ramirez was driven away, the city's relief was tinged with a lingering unease. Who was this man really? And what drove him to such depths of evil? The interrogation room at the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department was a stark contrast to the chaos of the streets. A cold, fluorescent-lit box where Ramirez faced off against detectives, including Frank Salerno and his partner, Gil Carrillo. Ramirez was a study in contradictions. His gaunt face, with its hollow cheeks and rotting teeth, was almost boyish, yet his eyes gleamed with a chilling intensity. He leaned back in his chair, smirking, as if the game wasn't over. "You think you've got me, but Satan's got my back," he taunted, his voice low and theatrical. The detectives pressed him, laying out the evidence: fingerprints from a stolen car, ballistics linking murders from Glassell Park to San Francisco, and survivor descriptions that painted a vivid picture of his cruelty. Ramirez's response was a confession of sorts, not of guilt but of pride. "I'm the Night Stalker," he said, his lips curling into a grin. "I did what I did because I wanted to, because it felt good." His words were a gut punch, a glimpse into a mind where morality had been replaced by a perverse worship of chaos. The trial, which began in September 1988, was a circus of horror and fascination, a spectacle that drew crowds of reporters, groupies, and the morbidly curious. The Los Angeles County Superior Court was packed daily, the air thick with anticipation as prosecutors laid out the case. 13 murders, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries, all tied to Ramirez by a mountain of forensic evidence and survivor testimony. The courtroom was a stage, and Ramirez played his role to perfection, reveling in the attention. He flashed satanic hand signs, winking at female spectators who, disturbingly, sent him love letters and filled the gallery with an almost sensual adoration. One juror was dismissed after receiving a threatening note, later linked to Ramirez's supporters, adding a layer of menace to the proceedings. The prosecution's case was airtight, with witnesses like Maria Hernandez and Inez Erickson recounting their nightmares with trembling voices, their courage a stark contrast to Ramirez's smug defiance. The climax of the trial came in September 1989, when the jury delivered its verdict after 22 days of deliberation, guilty on all 43 counts. The courtroom erupted, a mix of gasps and cheers as Ramirez stood, unbowed, and raised a fist with a pentagram drawn on his palm. "Death always went with the territory," he sneered during sentencing, his voice dripping with contempt. "I'll see you in Disneyland." The judge sentenced him to death 19 times over, a symbolic gesture for a city that demanded justice. As Ramirez was led away to San Quentin's death row, the crowd outside roared, a mix of triumph and lingering fear. The Night Stalker was caged, but his shadow lingered, a reminder of the fragility of safety and the allure of evil. Yet, the resolution was not as tidy as the city hoped. Ramirez's life on death row was a strange epilogue, filled with twists that kept the public hooked. He received fan mail by the thousands, married a prison groupie named Duran Leoe in 1996, and lived a bizarrely charmed existence behind bars, his charisma undimmed by concrete walls. Appeals dragged on for years, with defense attorneys arguing mental illness and ineffective counsel, keeping the case in the headlines. The city moved on, but the scars remained. Families of victims like Jenny Vincow and Max Zazera grappled with grief, while survivors like Lillian Doy lived with nightmares that never faded. Ramirez himself seemed to thrive on the infamy, his letters from prison hinting at secrets yet untold, crimes perhaps unconfessed. On June 7, 2013, Ramirez died of lymphoma at age 53, still on death row, never having faced a gas chamber. The news was a quiet anticlimax, a thief's death for a man who had stolen so much. Los Angeles exhaled, but the questions lingered like smoke. Were there other victims, bodies never found? What drove a man to embrace such darkness, to see Satan as a muse? The Night Stalker story ended not with a bang, but with a whisper, leaving behind a city forever changed, and a mystery that refused to be fully solved. The trial had closed one chapter, but the allure of Ramirez's evil, his charisma, his defiance, his cryptic hints at more, kept the world watching, waiting for answers that might never come. For those craving the next twist in this chilling saga, the story isn't over. Whispers of unlinked crimes, hidden diaries, and the Night Stalker's lingering influence on a new generation of darkness wait to be explored. Stay tuned to our channel for the next chapter, where we unravel the untold secrets of Richard Ramirez and the legacy of terror he left behind. The night is still young, and the shadows still hold their secrets.